Howdy folks, Josh Shipp here. I'm the founder of Youth Speaker University, where we help individuals make an impact and income speaking to students, educators, parents, and nonprofit organizations. In this video, we're going to discuss how to tell your personal story well and in service of your audience. Personal stories are great, but at some point, your audience is going to begin to think, all right, and what's in it for me? So in this video, we're going to discuss how to connect your story to their story so that your story serves the audience and is not just merely a personal anecdote. So in this video, just two things nice and simple. Number one, I'm going to walk you through a 3-step methodology for telling your personal story. And second, I'm going to invite you to let us help you tell your personal story in a way that impacts your future audiences. So let me walk you through this simple 3-step methodology for telling your personal story. It's very simply this: me, we, you. We're going to go through each of these components one at a time. So first off, me, this is where you tell your personal story. And this is obviously going to be highly specific to you. I was a foster kid. I was in the military. I was in prison. I grew up in a family of 13 different children. I experienced this extraordinary failure. I experienced this extraordinary success. 95% of the section of this speech, like if you had a manuscript, is going to be about me. If you looked at the manuscript, you're going to see lots of first-person words: I, me, my, mine. So this is you telling your specific personal story. It's going to be highly specific to you, and you want to try to use minimal but high impact ingredients. So meaning, you want to introduce sort of the most important characters in your story, but you don't want to introduce, 10 different characters. You don't want to introduce sort of 10 different characters in stories. You want to introduce one or two really, really important moments, really, really important individuals or characters that help shape your story. The difficult things you've gone through, the lessons that you learned from that, the funny moments, the sad moments, all of that. I like to think of it like a reduction sauce. Your job as a speaker is to, look at your personal story, like all of the ingredients that you could include, and pick not all of the ingredients on the counter, but just a handful, and then boil your story down so that it is, the most funny, the most engaging, the most heartbreaking, the most heartwarming moments, like a reduction sauce. It's like, you take that sauce and you boil it down to those key moments, those key ingredients. And I also, pardon the constant cooking analogies here, but I also think about preheating the oven so that when I get up there and I'm telling my personal story, I start at the point of peak friction. So I'm not going to slowly ramp into my story, just like a movie rarely kind of slowly ramps into it. A lot of movies that are engaging, they start from kind of pushing you right into the moment of peak friction, right into the moment of action. So often for me, when I'm kind of thinking about a personal story that I want to tell, I find once I kind of sketch it out or write it out or outline it out, if I then just go, well, what would it look like to start right in the middle of this story? How could I start my story right in the middle? Because typically in the middle, that's where that peak friction is. So it's my responsibility as a speaker to preheat the oven, not to get out there and sort of warm up and ramp into my story on the audience. So this is the first section of the me, we, you formula, is me telling your personal story. Now, it's important to keep going. I've seen a lot of speakers where they, just kind of tell their story, and their story is really funny or really heartbreaking or really interesting and fascinating. And that can absolutely be true. But if you just leave it there, then it's all about you. It's not of service to the audience. It's not particularly relevant to the audience. We've all sat through probably speeches like this where the story is indeed interesting, but you go, well, what's in it for me? Like, how does this relate to me? What is the point of this? And if you're not careful, this can feel like you're sort of doing therapy on stage, or that you're just being egotistical and you just want to tell your story. You don't want to tell your story as a service mechanism in order to try to deliver some sort of value to the audience. So next we move to the we step of this methodology. And this is where you're beginning to widen the scope from me to we, right? So you want to communicate to the audience that though I just told you a highly specific personal story, for example, when I go out and speak, I do talk quite a bit about my journey growing up as a foster kid. Now, in a typical audience, probably 5% of the audience is either a former foster kid or current foster parent. So I want to communicate that though I just told you a very specific personal story, that there are things in my story that we can all relate with, or there are things in my story that we all struggle with. So I'm going to give you kind of two different approaches that seem to work well that you could use. So approach number one is to prove this idea that, this is something we all struggle with or deal with. Prove it with either data or stats. So you could, this could literally be your transitionary sentence. You could say something like, it turns out I'm not the only one who has felt abandoned. Turns out I'm not the only one who has dealt with failure. Turns out I'm not the only one who has dealt with anxiety. Turns out I'm not the only one who, whatever your kind of topic and the topic of your personal story is. And then you can insert what that research and what that data is. Now, it's your job as a speaker to go out and find that information, find that data, to do the difficult work of going out there, churning through the scientific data and information to try to find that, so that your audience doesn't have to just take your word for it. When you say, turns out I'm not the only one, it's undeniably true. And approach number two is that you can just sort of logically tie it together. So this transitionary sentence might sound something like this. Now, you may not blank, but we all blank. So, for example, you may not be a foster kid like I am, but we have all felt abandoned. You may not have spent time in prison, but we all have negative thoughts that keep us imprisoned. So this is you kind of trying to logically widen the scope from me to we. Hey, you may think this is just about me being in foster care. You may think this is just about, me failing at this thing or this thing that I did or went through. But actually, if you zoom out, we all deal with this in our own way. Now, 95% of this section of the speech is about we, meaning the speaker and the audience. So in the beginning, I told you me, my story, my thing, my situation. Now I'm saying, now this is all about we. So if you looked at a manuscript of this part of the speech, here you're going to be using a lot of words like we, our, ours, us. You may not be a foster kid, but we all have felt abandoned. And again, here you want to keep going. You have indeed established a personal connection through the me section. You've began to establish some relevance through the we section. We all struggle with this sort of thing. We all deal with this in our own way. But you have not yet helped and served the audience yet with your story. So you want to swing all the way through this pitch. You want to follow all the way through. If you just do a couple of these, it's not as helpful as doing all three, me, we, and you. So let's now focus on the you component. In this section of your talk, you want to make it 100% about your audience. Let's talk about what you can gain from this. And you want to spell out the exact lessons for them. Don't make them figure it out. You see, this is sort of the gift that you're giving them. This is a way in which you're serving the audience, is you have done the hard, difficult work of figuring out the relevant lessons and insights from your story. That's why you're the speaker. That's why you're on stage. That's why you're holding the microphone. Do not burden the audience with making them figure it out. Now, of course, your audience is smart. They're going to contextualize it to their situation, their life, what's going on. But you should still spell out the lessons as explicitly and as clearly as you can. Don't put that burden on them. So you might say something like, here's what you can do. Here's what you can change. Here's what you can say. Here's what you can consider. To either avoid the mistakes I've made and that I told you about earlier, or to model the successes that I've had and that I told you about earlier. It's so important that you spell this out clearly for your audience. Kind of think of it like the punchline of a joke, right? Like just a silly dad joke example. Why did the chicken cross the road? To get away from Colonel Sanders. Okay, now, admittedly, it's a weak joke. It's a dad joke, indeed. But the gift of those two sentences is in the punchline, right? It's not in why did the chicken cross the road. We've all heard that a million times. We've heard many sad stories, interesting stories, engaging stories. That doesn't mean that those stories served us. They could just be interesting and entertaining. But as a speaker, you want to both engage, but you also want to serve your audience. You want to inspire them. You want to give them a practical lesson. So the gift of that joke is the second part, to get away from Colonel Sanders, right? The gift is the punchline. That is the hard part. That is the writer of the joke's responsibility or the comedian's responsibility. So the me and the we, that's the setup. When we get to this you section, that is the punchline. This is the gift. This is the thing. It's the entire reason we even shared our personal story about growing up in foster care or going to prison or growing up in a 15-family home or that failure we had or success that we had. The only reason that we told that story is to be of service to the audience. And so it's very important that you do that hard work to identify what that punchline is so that you can say to your audience very clearly, here's how this relates to you. Here's what you should do differently. Here's what you should say differently. Here's what you should change in your life. Here's what you should say if you want to avoid the mistakes I've made or if you want to repeat or model the successes that I have had. That is the essence of this 3-step methodology. Me, right? Here you're telling a narrow, specific, personal story. Again, for me, probably 5% of my audience are foster kids or foster parents. We begin to widen our personal story to show relevance, right? Even though only 5% of my audience is foster kids or foster parents, probably 90% of the audience has had a time where they have felt abandoned or someone they care about has felt abandoned. And then lastly, we move to you. Broadly relevant and specific lessons that are helpful for 100% of the audience, right? 100% of the audience can benefit in knowing how to either help themselves or someone else who feels abandoned. That is the me, we, you methodology for telling a personal story that genuinely is in service to your audience. Now I'd like you to consider letting us help you craft your personal story so that as a speaker, as you're going out there, it can be even more impactful. So 2 ways to do this. Number one, if you're already a member, a student of U Speaker University, twice a month we have a monthly coaching call on Zoom. You just log into your account here, click on the coaching button, and right here you will see when our next live coaching session is on Zoom. The entire point of these sessions is for you to be able to ask questions and get feedback on your speech, which is a lot of what we talked about today, your one-sheet, demo video, website, lead generation, or next level growth. So whether it's the art of speaking or the business. And obviously, if you're not currently a member of You Speaker University, we should talk. You Speaker University is our program that is designed to help you launch and grow your speaking business using our proven step-by-step methodologies. We have dozens of hours of helpful training videos like this, plus you get ongoing access to our twice per month live coaching and feedback sessions via Zoom. Plus, we've priced it to be roughly the cost of one paid speech in the youth and education industry, so that, yes, indeed, you have skin in the game, but it's also a fair price for you to be able to consider an ROI if you're genuinely serious about that. So that concludes this video about how to tell your personal story, not only well, but in service of your audience.